She grew up in a town where nothing ever changed. A place where dreams felt more like distant stories than real possibilities. Her mother worked double shifts at a local diner, coming home exhausted but still managing to tuck her in at night. Rent was always late, and the fridge was often half empty. But the hardest part wasn't the lack of money. It was the quiet fear in her mother's eyes. The unspoken worry that tomorrow might be even harder than today. From a young age, she learned to make every dollar stretch. While other kids in school showed off new clothes, she wore hand-me-downs that never quite fit. Birthdays meant practical gifts, shoes that would last a few years instead of toys. She watched her mother count change at the grocery store, putting back items when the total was too high. She never asked for extras because she understood. Money wasn't just tight, it was fragile, like a thread that could snap at any moment. She saw her mother work harder than anyone she knew, yet they were always one step away from losing everything. The landlord knocked too often. Bills piled up on the kitchen counter. And when the car broke down, there was no backup plan. Just a long walk to work in the freezing cold. It was then she realized that hard work alone wasn't enough. Something had to change, and she was determined that one day it would. Lying awake at night, she made a silent promise to herself. She wouldn't live like this forever. She wouldn't spend her life barely getting by. She didn't know how yet, but she was gonna find a way out. And not just for herself, but for her mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything to keep her afloat. One day, she would make sure they never had to worry about money again. The dream of a better life had always been tied to education. She believed that if she worked hard in school, she could break free from the cycle of struggle. But when the tuition bill arrived, reality hit hard. There was no money left. Her mother had already stretched every dollar to keep them housed and fed. Scholarships weren't enough, and loans felt like a trap she couldn't afford to risk. With no other choice, she dropped out, packing up the little she had and leaving behind the one thing she thought could change her future. As if that loss wasn't enough, life threw another punch. Her mother's health took a turn for the worse, forcing her to stop working. Bills piled up faster than they could open them. One night, a final notice appeared on their door: eviction. The place they had called home for years was no longer theirs. With nowhere to go, they crammed their belongings into an old car, spending nights parked in empty lots, pretending it was just temporary. But deep down, she feared this was their new reality. For the first time, she felt truly lost. No school, no job, no home. She sent out dozens of applications, hoping someone would take a chance on her. But rejection after rejection left her feeling invisible. The world kept moving forward, but she was stuck, drowning in hopelessness. Some nights, she sat in the passenger seat of that car, staring at the city lights, wondering if people walking by had any idea how quickly life could fall apart. She wanted to believe things would get better, but how? Every path seemed blocked. Every plan had crumbled. She had nothing left except $10 in her pocket. It wasn't enough to fix anything. It wasn't even enough for a meal. But what she did next with that $10 would change everything. She stared at the crumpled $10 bill in her hand, knowing it wasn't enough to fix anything. Could buy a cheap meal, maybe last a day, but what about tomorrow? Hunger was a familiar feeling by now, but the thought of staying stuck like this, trapped in a cycle of survival, was worse. She needed something bigger than just another meal. She needed a way out. That's when a thought hit her. What if this wasn't just her last $10? What if it was the beginning of something? Sitting in the car, she looked around at the city streets. People rushing to work, stopping for coffee, grabbing food on the go. And that's when she saw it. A small stand selling homemade baked goods. A line of people, cash in hand, waiting to buy something as simple as a cookie. Her mind raced. She had always loved baking with her mom, making treats out of whatever they had in the kitchen. Could she turn that into something? It wasn't a business plan. It wasn't a guaranteed success, but it was a start. She walked into the nearest grocery store, every cent now a serious decision. Flour, sugar, butter. She could only afford the basics. No fancy packaging, no professional tools. Just enough to bake a small batch of cookies. That night, using a borrowed oven at a shelter, She mixed the ingredients with shaking hands. Would anyone actually buy them? Would they even care? She had no backup plan. If this failed, she had nothing left. But for the first time in a long time, she felt something close to hope. The next morning, she stood outside a busy office building with a simple sign, "Fresh homemade cookies, $1." The first few people walked past without even looking at her. Doubt crept in. Maybe this was a mistake. But then someone stopped. A man in a suit, digging into his pocket for $1. He took a bite, nodded, and smiled. "These are good," he said. And just like that, she made her first sale. It wasn't just $1. It was proof. Proof that maybe, just maybe, she could turn this into something more. The single dollar bill felt heavier in her hand than it should have. It wasn't just money. It was proof that someone saw value in what she had made. She tucked it into her pocket and stood a little straighter, watching as the man disappeared into the crowd. Her heart pounded. Could she do it again? She forced herself to call out to the passing crowd, her voice shaky but determined, "Fresh homemade cookies, just $1." Slowly, more people stopped. A woman in a rush grabbed 2 for her kids. A tired construction worker took 1 with his coffee. Each sale was small, but with every exchange, something shifted inside her. Doubt gave way to determination. She wasn't just standing on a sidewalk selling cookies. She was proving to herself that she could create something out of nothing. And for the first time in weeks, she wasn't just surviving. She was building. By noon, she had sold out. Every last cookie, gone. She counted her earnings. $30. It wasn't much, but compared to the $10 she started with, it felt like a fortune. She could have spent it on a warm meal, maybe even a cheap motel room for the night. But instead, she made a different choice. She walked straight back to the store and bought more ingredients. If one batch could turn $10 into $30, what could she do with $30? That night, as she baked again in the borrowed kitchen, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, hope. Not the kind that came from wishing things would change, but the kind that came from taking action. She had started with nothing, no safety net, no backup plan. But she had something now, momentum, and she wasn't going to stop. Because if one person was willing to buy, maybe 100 would. Maybe 1,000. Maybe. This was just the beginning. Success didn't come in a straight line. Some days she sold out within hours. Other days, she stood in the cold for hours, watching people walk past without even a glance. Rejection stung, but what hurt more was the doubt creeping back in. Was this just a fluke? Was she fooling herself into believing this could actually turn into something? On the hardest days, when not a single cookie sold, she sat in her car, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she should give up. And then came the ridicule. Some people laughed at her. "You really think selling cookies on the street will get you anywhere?" Others dismissed her completely, avoiding eye contact like she didn't exist. Even people she thought were friends told her to just get a real job, as if she hadn't already tried. But she wasn't just looking for a job. She was trying to build a way out, and no one else had to believe in it. As long as she did, money was still tight, painfully tight. Some nights, she had to choose between gas for the car or food for herself. There were weeks when she barely scraped by, stretching every dollar, eating the broken cookies no one bought. And when the weather turned harsh, the idea of standing outside for hours became unbearable. She thought about quitting more times than she could count. But every time she was ready to walk away, she remembered why she started. Instead of letting failure break her, she let it teach her. If one location didn't work, she found another. If people ignored her, she learned how to pitch better. If one cookie recipe wasn't selling, she experimented until she found what people loved. Every setback, every rejection, it wasn't the end of her journey. It was part of it. And with each lesson, she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was getting smarter, stronger, and closer to something bigger. One rainy afternoon, she almost packed up early. Sales had been slow, and standing in the cold, soaked to the bone, made every doubt resurface. But just as she turned to leave, a woman approached. She looked important, sharp blazer, confident stride. "Did you make these yourself?" she asked, picking up a cookie. With a hesitant nod, She watched as the woman took a bite, then smiled. "These are incredible. Have you ever thought about selling them in stores?" The question caught her off guard. Stores? She had been so focused on surviving day by day that she never imagined something bigger. The woman introduced herself, a local cafe owner looking for homemade products to sell. She offered to stock her cookies, but there was one problem. The cafe needed a consistent supply. No more baking in borrowed kitchens. No more selling one by one on the street. If she wanted this, she had to think bigger. That night, she made a decision. No more small thinking. She used every dollar she had saved to rent space in a shared commercial kitchen. She reached out to small coffee shops, offices, even local events, anywhere that might take a chance on her cookies. And then, something unexpected happened. A food blogger stumbled upon her cookies at a cafe, posted about them, and overnight, people were asking, "Where can I buy these?" It was the moment that changed everything. Orders started pouring in. What started as a desperate $10 gamble had turned into something real. For the first time, she wasn't just making ends meet. She was building a business. And as she looked at the demand growing beyond anything she had imagined, one thing became clear. This wasn't just about cookies anymore. This was about creating something bigger than herself. Success didn't mean she could slow down. It meant she had to move faster. The sudden demand was overwhelming. She was baking nonstop, barely keeping up with orders. Every dollar she made went right back into ingredients, better packaging, and kitchen rent. There was no room for waste. She knew one wrong move could bring everything crashing down. But for the first time, she wasn't just thinking about making it through the week. She was thinking about the future. She couldn't do it alone anymore. At first, she hesitated. Hiring someone felt impossible when every cent mattered. But exhaustion wasn't an option. She brought in her first helper, another woman who had struggled to find work, just like she once had. Then another. They weren't just employees. They were people who understood what it meant to start from nothing. And together, they weren't just baking cookies, they were building something bigger than all of them. With a small team in place, she focused on expanding beyond coffee shops. She reached out to local grocery stores, farmers markets, even small business events. Every rejection pushed her to refine her pitch, to make people see the value in what she had created. And slowly, doors started opening. What began as a side hustle was becoming a real, structured business. One day, she looked around the kitchen she once struggled to afford. Now it was full of movement. Ovens running, people working, orders being packed. This wasn't just about cookies anymore. It was about proving that you don't need a perfect start to build something great. She had turned $10 into something sustainable. But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. Success brought more than just money. It brought problems she never expected. As her cookies gained popularity, big companies took notice. One day, she received a letter from a large competitor. At first, she thought it was an opportunity. But as she read the fine print, her stomach dropped. They weren't offering a deal. They were threatening legal action. They claimed her branding was too similar to theirs. She had two choices: fight a battle she couldn't afford, or change everything she had built. At the same time, her personal life was falling apart. Late nights, endless work, and constant stress took a toll. Friends stopped calling. She missed birthdays, family gatherings. She barely had time to sleep, let alone maintain relationships. "You've changed," someone told her. And maybe she had. But how could they understand? She had worked too hard to let it all slip away. She had to keep going. Then came the worst mistake of her career. Desperate to scale faster, she trusted the wrong business partner, a supplier who promised lower costs and faster production. It was too good to be true. A few weeks later, the truth came out. The ingredients weren't up to standard. Some batches had been ruined, and customers noticed. Complaints poured in. Stores pulled her products from their shelves. In a matter of days, she went from thriving to almost losing everything. She sat alone in her office, staring at the contract she had signed. The bills piling up, the messages from disappointed customers. Was this it? Had she fought this hard only to watch everything fall apart? For the first time in years, she truly considered walking away. But deep down, she knew one thing. She had already rebuilt her life from nothing once before. She could do it again. She refused to let this be the end of her story. Instead of drowning in regret, she took full responsibility for what had happened. She reached out to every customer who had complained, personally apologizing and offering refunds or replacements. It was costly, but it was the only way to rebuild trust. She cut ties with the dishonest supplier, even though it meant slowing down production. Reputation was more important than quick profits. This time, she would do things the right way. She also realized something critical. She couldn't do this alone anymore. For years, she had tried to control every detail, afraid that letting go would mean losing everything. But great businesses aren't built by one person, they're built by a team. She hired a trusted operations manager to handle logistics, allowing her to focus on what she did best, creating and growing the brand. It was one of the hardest decisions she had ever made, but also the smartest. Then came the boldest move of her career. Instead of just rebuilding, she reinvented her business. She launched a direct-to-consumer website, cutting out the middleman and selling straight to her customers. She shared her story openly, showing people that this wasn't just about cookies. It was about perseverance, second chances, and proving that anyone can start with nothing and build something incredible. The response? Overwhelming. Sales skyrocketed. Looking back, she realized that her biggest failures had forced her to grow. She wasn't just a baker anymore. She was a CEO. And this wasn't just a cookie business. It was a movement. A reminder that resilience is the real ingredient of success. The girl who once had just $10 was now running $1 million company. But she wasn't done yet. The best was still to come. Today, she stands in a place she once thought was impossible. Her small cookie business has grown into a multi-million-dollar brand, with products sold nationwide. What started with a desperate $10 gamble is now a company with employees, partnerships, and a loyal customer base. But for her, the most valuable part isn't the money. It's the freedom. The freedom to create, to inspire, and to build something that matters. But she never forgot where she came from. She remembers what it felt like to be at rock bottom, to wonder if she'd ever get out. So now she gives back. She runs mentorship programs for struggling entrepreneurs, teaching them what she wished someone had taught her. She hires people who need a second chance, because she knows better than anyone that one opportunity can change a life. Her biggest lesson? Success was never about luck. It was about mindset, about showing up when it was hard, adapting when things went wrong, and never letting failure define her. She wasn't the smartest, the richest, or the most experienced. She was just the one who refused to quit. And that made all the difference. So now, ask yourself, what's stopping you? She built an empire from nothing. What could you build if you stopped doubting and just started? Drop a comment below. What's your dream? And what's one step you can take today to get closer to it? Let's talk. And if her story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because the next breakthrough could be yours.